Welcome to Betrayal Narratives. In today's video, we dive into a story that is going to challenge your idea of comfort, pressure, and what a breaking point really looks like. So sit back, focus in, and let this story take over your imagination for the next few minutes. She was alone in a space so small and silent that even her heartbeat felt loud. The walls around her weren't walls at all, but dense stone pressing inward from every direction, leaving only a narrow pocket of air, barely enough to sit, barely enough to breathe. Every breath echoed back at her, warm and damp, as if the space itself was inhaling with her. There was no light. There was no sound except the faint crackle of settling earth. It felt as if the world had folded in around her, sealing her into a place meant for nobody. Her knees touched the cold ground, her back scraped the unyielding surface behind her. And when she reached outward, her palms met a ceiling so low it forced her to bow her head. It wasn't designed for standing, wasn't designed for comfort, wasn't designed for anything human. She had to keep her arms tucked close, movements precise and careful, because there wasn't enough room to shift without stone brushing her skin. At first, she tried to steady her breathing, convincing herself she'd get used to the tightness. But the tighter she tried to control her breath, the more it slipped. The more she tried to quiet her pulse, the louder it pounded. The more she tried to force calm, the faster panic clawed up her throat. Her chest rose and fell too quickly, air scraping in through shallow gasps that seemed to bounce right back at her, recycling the heat of her own panic. She whispered to herself, telling her mind to stay sharp, to stay logical, to break this down step by step. But even the act of whispering felt wrong in a place where sound had nowhere to go, simply pressed against the stone and returned to her, like her voice was trapped too. Her fingers trembled as she placed them along the rough surface beside her, trying to understand the boundaries of the space. She traced every line, every ridge, every uneven groove, painting the room in her mind since her eyes had nothing to work with. Each texture told her the same thing. This was small, cramped, and unforgiving. The ceiling dipped lower in one corner. The wall curved inward in another. There was no doorway she could feel, no seam, no crack that suggested an exit. The air was still, unmoving, heavy. When she exhaled, warmth brushed her face with nowhere to disperse. When she inhaled, she tasted dust and stone. She shifted slightly, and even that minimal movement sent her shoulder brushing the wall, her elbow colliding with the opposite side. The simple act of adjusting her posture became an ordeal. Every inch mattered. She tried to straighten her spine, but the ceiling denied her. She attempted to stretch her legs, but the walls refused. She was held in place by the shape of the space, molded into stillness by the limits around her. Minutes passed, but they didn't feel like minutes. Time felt distorted, stretched thin, and warped by the darkness. She couldn't tell if she had been there for 10 minutes or an hour. Her sense of direction vanished first, then her sense of distance, then her sense of control. Her breathing hitched again as the panic returned, creeping up slowly this time, like something moving through the dark toward her, patient, deliberate. Her chest felt tighter. The air felt hotter. She pulled her knees close without even meaning to, shrinking herself into an even smaller shape, as if folding in on herself would help her escape the walls pressing on her. But the space didn't care. The space stayed the same size. Her throat tightened as she fought against the rising pressure in her lungs. She tried inhaling slowly, letting the air fill the space between her ribs. But halfway through the breath, her chest squeezed painfully, refusing to expand any further. It felt as if the darkness itself was sitting on her rib cage, pushing down evenly, relentlessly. Her mind raced through the thoughts she didn't want to think. What if the air thinned? What if the heat built up too much? What if she was using more energy than the space could give back? She pressed her forehead to the cold stone and tried to focus on that sensation, the roughness, the chill, the solidity, something real, something outside of her spiraling thoughts. But even the stone felt closer now, as if it had shifted, as if it had pressed in another fraction of an inch. She swallowed hard. The sound echoed. For a moment, she closed her eyes even though the darkness made no difference. She imagined being anywhere else, a wide field, a quiet room, a hallway, a doorway. Even just a small bedroom with 4 walls she could actually see. She imagined stretching her legs without hitting anything. She imagined taking a deep breath without hearing it bounce back at her. But the fantasies dissolved as soon as she opened her eyes again into this same suffocating black. She placed her palms flat against the ground, grounding herself. The stone was cool. The firmness beneath her reminded her she was still anchored, still present, still able to feel something real. She focused on the tiny details, the gritty texture, the tiny bits of loose sediment beneath her fingertips, the faint contours carved by time. Sometimes grounding worked. Sometimes it didn't. This time it only half worked. Her breath steadied for a few seconds, long enough to give her a flicker of control. But then the quiet settled back over her like a blanket that was too heavy, smothering her. Her chest tightened again. A tremor rose in her hands, subtle at first, then more noticeable as her lungs begged for a deeper inhale that her mind refused to allow. She leaned her head back against the low ceiling, the stone scraping her hair. Her neck curved awkwardly, forced into a position that strained her muscles. She tried shifting again slowly, carefully, but the moment she did, her elbow struck the wall. And the sudden reminder of how little room she had left her breath spiking again. She whispered, "I'm okay," even though she wasn't. Her voice sounded small, frail, trapped. She felt the edges of another panic wave building, starting as a cold sensation in her belly, then traveling up her ribs, tightening everything on the way. Her heart thudded faster. She tried to breathe, but the air came out in short bursts, her lungs refusing to cooperate. She pressed her palm against her chest as if she could manually slow it down. Her body screamed for a space that just didn't exist. Can you imagine that feeling? The need to expand, to run, to escape, just surging through your veins. But there was no escape. Her body wanted movement, and the room, it wanted stillness. It's a perfect, terrible opposition. She curled forward, pressing her forehead to her knees, trying to make herself even smaller than the space demanded. She clenched her jaw, desperately trying to stop the panic from spilling over completely. She had no idea if she'd been there for 5 minutes or 50, just trying to regain control. Each time she fought it, and each time it returned. And each time it returned, it felt heavier. It felt closer to winning. Nobody could see her. Nobody even knew this terrible space existed. In this tiny, crushing pocket of stone, she was the only heartbeat, the only breath, the only voice. The silence around her was a weight, all its own thick, almost ghost-like, filling the air between the walls as if it had a physical form. It was a silence that screamed. Not the stone, something deeper, something alive. She felt a spark, a flicker, a tiny whisper of defiance. Because even when the world shrinks around you, even when the walls press in, even when the dark feels absolutely endless, even when your breath shakes and your voice breaks, there is always one thing that can be trapped. She inhaled slowly, this time letting the breath travel deeper, pushing against the immense pressure in her chest. It hurt, it trembled, but she did it anyway. She took that breath, she whispered again, but this time her voice was steadier. "I'm not done." Because survival doesn't always begin with force, doesn't always start with a shout or a bang. Sometimes it begins with a single breath that hurts to take, a voice that shakes, a thought that can barely form. Sometimes it begins with this simple, stubborn refusal to give in. And that's where her story, where any story of survival truly begins. It makes you think, doesn't it? How often do we feel trapped, not by stone walls, but by circumstances? We feel like the space is shrinking, like we're running out of air. We curl up trying to make ourselves smaller, hoping the pressure will ease. That one intentional breath, that one whispered promise to yourself can be the turning point. Think about the power in that. It's not done. It's not a grand declaration to the world. It's a quiet, internal rebellion. It's the first step away from despair and toward hope. It's the recognition that even when everything else is taken away, you still have a choice. You can choose to breathe. You can choose to fight. You can choose to believe that this is not the end. It starts with finding that flicker, that spark of will that refuses to be extinguished. If you're ever in a place that feels dark and overwhelming, remember this. It's a reminder that no matter how small you feel, your will is limitless. It can't be confined. It can't be crushed. It's the part of you that will always fight for one more breath, one more moment, one more chance. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this moment with me.